Hey everyone, welcome back. You know, uh, Today we're doing something kind of special. We're taking a deep dive into something you specifically requested.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and it's figuring out how to tell real science from the stuff that's maybe a bit, on the fringes,
Right.
and even the outright pseudoscience. And honestly, you couldn't have picked a better time for this because in today's world, we're bombarded with information from all sides, right?
Absolutely. And it's what's interesting is you've given us a really diverse mix of sources to work with here. Articles, personal stories, even a section from a book about the borderlands of science.
Oh, wow.
It's obvious you're looking for a nuanced understanding of how to sift through it all.
Exactly. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose sometimes.
Yeah.
So how do we build that mental filter to make sure we're not drowning in a sea of misinformation?
Yeah.
We're not born knowing how to spot a bogus claim,
All
right?
right. We all have this internal knowledge filter that helps
Yeah.
us navigate the world.
Yeah.
Think about it this way. Have you ever gotten a chain letter promising you'll get rich quick if you just forward it to 10 people? Or maybe you've seen those ads for miracle weight loss pills that sound a little too good to be true.
Oh, totally. I actually fell for one of those make money from home schemes when I was younger.
Mhm.
Lost a bit of money on that one.
Oh,
Learned a valuable lesson,
there
though.
you go. That's your knowledge filter kicking in. You compared the new information, the promise of easy money, with your existing knowledge and experiences.
Right.
And over time, as we encounter more information and have more experiences, that filter gets refined, but we can always make it stronger.
So how do we apply this filter to things like, I don't know, conflicting health advice? One day coffee is good for you, the next it's bad. Same with things like certain types of food
Yeah.
or even medical procedures.
Right.
It can feel impossible to sort through it all.
It definitely can be overwhelming, and this is where having a solid understanding of how science works is so important. Science, with its emphasis on evidence testing and peer review, provides a robust framework for evaluating claims.
One of the sources you sent actually talked about a scientist putting this to the test.
Right.
It was about a psychic healer, Dr. Yuen, who claimed to have these amazing abilities.
Yes. Michael Shermer, the author of the book you sent an excerpt from, talks about this case. Dr. Yuen was known for healing people with just his energy. But when they tested him under controlled conditions, like having people blindfolded to rule out the placebo effect, he couldn't replicate those amazing results.
So even though people believed in his powers, the evidence didn't actually support it.
Right.
That's a good reminder to look beyond the surface, right?
Absolutely. And Shermer goes on to propose this really interesting framework for categorizing different types of knowledge claims. He talks about normal science, which is the stuff that's been rigorously tested and widely accepted, like the theory of evolution. Then there's non-science, which covers claims that lack evidence or contradict well-established science.
So where does something like astrology fall? I know some people swear by it, but it's not exactly accepted in the scientific community.
That's a good question. It's actually a perfect example of what Shermer calls Borderlands science.
Oh, interesting.
These are claims that are intriguing, might even have some anecdotal evidence to back them up, but haven't quite reached the level of normal science yet.
Okay, so it's like a spectrum with normal science on one end and non-science on the other.
Right.
And then this borderland science in between, kind of like a Venn diagram with some overlap.
Exactly. It's not about putting things into rigid boxes, but recognizing that there are degrees of scientific certainty.
Okay.
And that's where things get really interesting because it requires us to be even more critical in our thinking.
I'm already sensing this is going to be a wild ride. So what are some other examples of things that fall into this borderland science category?
Well, you mentioned astrology, which some people use to make financial decisions, that financial astrology, you included.
Right.
Then there's things like SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or even certain aspects of hypnosis, which can have some pretty mind-boggling effects.
Ooh, hypnosis. Now we're talking.
Yeah.
Some people think it's a total scam, while others swear it's changed their lives. Where does science stand on this one?
Hypnosis is a prime example of something that sits right on that border. There are these remarkable experiments with something called the hidden observer, which suggests that something truly unique is happening in the brain during hypnosis.
Hold on, hidden observer.
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It does, right?
Sure.
So imagine this. A researcher hypnotizes someone and tells them they won't feel pain while their arm is submerged in ice water.
Wait, wouldn't they still feel the cold? I mean, ice water is ice water.
You'd think so, right? But in these experiments, the hypnotized subjects reported feeling little to no pain.
Uh,
However, here's where it gets really interesting. When later asked to recall the experience they reported, pain levels similar to those who weren't hypnotized at all.
so even though they didn't consciously feel the pain during hypnosis, a part of their mind was still registering it.
Mhm.
That's amazing. But does that mean hypnosis is real? Or is it just some kind of elaborate mind trick?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, it's one that still has scientists debating.
Wow.
Some argue that it's just a form of role-playing, while others point to the hidden observer phenomenon as evidence of a genuine altered state of consciousness.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. But before we go too far down the hypnosis rabbit hole, I think it's important to connect this back to our main topic, building that mental filter.
You're absolutely right, and this is where things get even more complex because we're talking about the nature of consciousness itself.
Right.
What does it mean to be conscious? Where does our sense of self reside in this complex network of brain modules?
Wow, those are some big questions. And I'm guessing science doesn't have all the answers yet.
Not quite. But what's fascinating is that science gives us the tools to even ask these questions in the first place.
Right.
It provides a framework for exploring these mysteries, even if we don't have all the answers yet.
So even though science is a human endeavor and humans are, well, let's just say, a bit messy sometimes,
Yeah.
it still gives us the best chance of getting closer to the truth, right?
That's exactly it. And to put it beautifully, Michael Shermer quotes the philosopher Immanuel Kant in his book.
Oh, wow.
Kant said, "Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made."
That's a powerful image.
He's
It's like acknowledging that we're all a bit flawed, but we can still strive to build something solid and trustworthy.
Precisely. And that's what science at its best is all about. It's a process that acknowledges our limitations, but still strives to create knowledge that's as objective and reliable as possible.
This has already given me so much to think about. So where do we go from here? I mean, how do we take this idea of a knowledge filter and actually apply it to the real world?
Well, first, let's talk about some real-world examples of where this stuff actually matters. Because it's not just about debunking psychics or spotting scams. It's about being able to evaluate information critically in all areas of our lives.
Give us an example,
Yeah.
like something our listener can relate to right now.
Let's take the example of government pronouncements. Think about nuclear energy or even the space program. There's often a lot of skepticism surrounding these topics, with people questioning the safety of nuclear power or the cost-effectiveness of space exploration.
Right, because there's always that question, who's benefiting from this? Are we getting the whole story?
Exactly, and that's where your knowledge filter comes in.
Okay.
It's about looking beyond the headlines, delving into the evidence, and considering different perspectives before forming an opinion.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this applies to some pretty big issues. But what about something a bit more personal? Like, how do we use this knowledge filter when it comes to things like health and wellness?
That's a great point. In fact, that's where it can be even more important to have a strong knowledge filter.
Right.
We're bombarded with so much information about diet, exercise supplements, alternative therapies. It's hard to know what to believe.
Oh, absolutely. Just scroll through social media for 5 minutes and you'll see miracle cures for everything.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the hype.
Yeah.
I've definitely been tempted by those ads promising younger-looking skin or a magic pill for weight loss.
And that's exactly where those critical thinking skills come in. It's not about dismissing everything that falls outside of conventional medicine, but rather about approaching those claims with a healthy dose of skepticism and looking for evidence to back them up.
So, like, if someone's promoting a new supplement that claims to boost your immune system,
Right.
what kind of questions should we be asking?
First, consider the source. Is this information coming from a reputable scientific study published in a peer-reviewed journal?
Okay,
Or is it an influencer trying to sell you something?
right.
Then look at the evidence itself. Are there any controlled studies that show this supplement actually works? What are the potential risks and side effects?
It's about thinking for ourselves, not just blindly following what we see online or hear from friends.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that idea of Borderlands science. There are many alternative therapies and wellness practices that fall into this category, things like acupuncture, chiropractic care, even meditation.
So it's not about saying these things are definitely bogus, but rather about approaching them with an open mind while also demanding evidence.
Right. Some of these practices might have some scientific backing, while others might be more based on anecdotal evidence or traditional wisdom. The key is to do your research talk to qualified professionals and make informed decisions that are right for you.
It's like being a detective for your own well-being.
I like that. We need to be detectives not only when it comes to our physical health, but also our mental and emotional well-being.
Oh, right.
There's a lot of misinformation out there about psychology, self-help, and personal growth as well.
Speaking of psychology, didn't one of the sources you have touch on the debate about the effectiveness of Freudian psychoanalysis?
Yes. And this is a great example of how science evolves and how our understanding of what constitutes good science can change over time.
Okay.
Freudian psychoanalysis was incredibly influential for decades, but it's been heavily criticized in recent years for lacking empirical support and relying too heavily on subjective interpretation.
So even ideas that were once considered groundbreaking can later be questioned and reevaluated as new evidence emerges.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to stay curious, to keep learning, and to be open to changing our minds when presented with new information.
It's like that saying, the only constant is change. And in the world of science, that's definitely true.
Speaking of change, one of your sources mentioned this fascinating concept called punctuated equilibrium. It challenges the idea that evolution always happens gradually and suggests that there can be periods of rapid change followed by long periods of stability.
So instead of slow and steady climb, it's more like a staircase with sudden jumps.
Exactly. And this idea was initially met with resistance from some scientists who were attached to the traditional view of gradual evolution. But as more evidence emerged, punctuated equilibrium became more widely accepted within the scientific community.
Okay, so even within normal science, there can be these paradigm shifts, these moments where our understanding takes a leap forward.
Right.
And it reminds me of another historical example that you mentioned earlier, the Copernican revolution.
Yeah.
People were so resistant to the idea that the Earth revolved around the sun.
It's amazing, right? They were so attached to the geocentric model, the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe, that it took a long time for the heliocentric model to gain acceptance.
It just shows how powerful our preconceived notions can be and how difficult it can be to change our minds even when faced with overwhelming evidence.
Absolutely. And that's why critical thinking is such an essential skill.
Right.
It allows us to step back from our own biases and evaluate information objectively.
So we've talked about this idea of a boundary detection kit for evaluating claims.
Right.
Can you give us a quick refresher on some of the key questions we should be asking?
Of course. First, consider the source of the information.
Okay.
Is it coming from a credible and unbiased source? Next, look for evidence.
Okay.
What kind of data supports the claim? Has it been replicated by other researchers? And are there any alternative explanations that have been considered?
It's about thinking like a scientist, questioning everything and demanding evidence.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to dig a little deeper.
Okay.
If a study is cited, try to find the original source and read it for yourself. Look for any potential biases or conflicts of interest.
So we shouldn't just take someone's word for it, even if they have a fancy title or a lot of followers.
Right.
We need to do our own due diligence.
Exactly. And remember that science is a process, not a destination.
Oh.
There will always be new discoveries, new challenges to our understanding, and new questions to explore.
I'm already feeling more empowered to navigate this crazy world of information. But before we go any further, I'm curious to hear about some of your own experiences with this. I know you've mentioned dabbling in hypnosis before.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was a fascinating experience. I went into it with a healthy dose of skepticism, not really sure what to expect.
Right.
Some sessions felt like I was just going along with the suggestions, but then there were others where I felt a distinct shift in my awareness.
Like you really felt hypnotized.
There were moments where I felt a sense of detachment, a different kind of focus. It was like a part of my mind was observing what was happening while another part was experiencing it.
That sounds incredible. Does that relate at all to the hidden observer phenomenon we talked about earlier?
It's definitely possible, and it just goes to show that even with all our scientific knowledge, there are still so many mysteries about the human mind that we're just beginning to unravel.
It really makes you realize how much we still don't know about ourselves and the world around us. It's both humbling and exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a lifelong journey. There's always something new to discover, something new to question, and something new to learn.
I think that's a perfect segue into something that really struck me from one of the sources you shared. It was about Deepak Chopra, the medical doctor turned alternative medicine guru. He's become this huge figure, blending science with spirituality, and he seems to really resonate with people who are looking for a more holistic approach to health and well-being.
Yes. Chopra's work is fascinating because it highlights this gray area between science and spirituality. He often uses scientific language to explain concepts that are rooted in ancient traditions, and that can be appealing to people who feel like mainstream science doesn't offer all the answers.
It's like he's speaking to a deeper human need, a need for meaning, for connection, for something that goes beyond the purely material.
Absolutely. And it raises some interesting questions about the limits of science. Can science explain everything about the human experience? Or are there some aspects of consciousness, of spirituality, of subjective experience that might always remain elusive?
Those are some deep questions, and I'm guessing there's no easy answer.
Not really. It's a debate that philosophers and scientists have been grappling with for centuries. But what's important is that we're having these conversations, that we're acknowledging the complexity of the world and the limitations of our own understanding.
So even as we strive to build this robust knowledge filter, it's important to remain humble, to recognize that there are still mysteries out there, things we might never fully comprehend.
Exactly, and that's okay. In fact, I think that's what makes the pursuit of knowledge so exciting. It's not about having all the answers, it's about the journey of exploration, the constant questioning and seeking.
I love that perspective. It takes the pressure off needing to know everything and allows us to simply enjoy the process of learning.
And remember, it's not just about learning for the sake of learning. It's about applying what we learn, about using that knowledge to make better decisions, to live more fulfilling lives, and to create a better world.
So it's about connecting the head and the heart, the intellectual and the emotional.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting because it's about integrating our knowledge with our values, our intuition, and our lived experiences. It's about recognizing that we're not just rational beings, we're also emotional, spiritual, and social creatures.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about knowledge filters, the fuzzy boundaries of science, the importance of critical thinking, and even the limits of human understanding. I have to say I'm feeling a bit more equipped to navigate this complex world of information.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, it's a continuous process. The more we question, the more we learn. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. And that's okay. Embrace the uncertainty, embrace the mystery, and never stop exploring.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave our listener with one final thought, something that really resonated with me from our conversation today.
Oh, cool.
It was that quote from Michael Shermer: "For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled."
That's such a powerful reminder. We can try to spin the narrative, we can try to manipulate the facts, but ultimately reality has a way of catching up with us.
So let's strive to be honest with ourselves, with each other, and with the world around us. Let's embrace the power of critical thinking, the beauty of scientific inquiry, and the never-ending quest for truth. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep those knowledge filters sharp.